Welcome everybody. And today I wanted to bring you guys something a little different. So this is going to be a new thing that I'm trying out. We're going to be trying the whole podcast shtick. I'm your host, Shades, or otherwise known as Shadies on Broadway. And I've titled this podcast Shadies on Voice. You can call it Shades on Voice because that's how it reads, but kind of a little fun thing to the name. The way that it was originated is I took my two favorite Disney villains, Scar and Hades, and I kind of merged those two together. And the on Broadway part actually comes in from Scars on Broadway, which is a band led by Darren Malkian, who also plays in System of a Down, which is my favorite music band or music artist. Want to give you a little bit of intro to that. But without further ado, you guys are here for the actual podcast episode. So what is that going to be on? So that is going to be a deep dive on the psychology of player interaction in the board game Settlers of Catan. For those that have listened to me or watched some of my previous content, a lot of people know that I don't really like doing things scripted. I'm one of those people that either prefers to do everything kind of on prompt or kind of prefers to just jot down some keynotes and kind of just roll into it. So what I'm hoping to accomplish, and if this is something that I end up keeping in a long-term type of perspective or long-term type of commitment, I do have like a lot of keynotes that I have jotted down here, but I don't want to read off a script. And I don't think people want to hear that either, coming from, listening to someone. If you're listening to this, that kind of implies you're here for a specific reason. But I've wasted enough time. Let's jump right into the heart of why you're here. So what makes the game, dynamic and so exciting? Catan is honestly quite controversial in a sense. Like if you address this game in a board gaming group, you'll tend to hear one of two things. You'll hear either people really like the game, but they've just played it so many times that they've grown tired of it, or you'll find like one polar opposite of that spectrum where it's people that just they hate it because it's too luck based. They don't like the fact that there's no control in it. They find it to be a party game. And to me, part of the excitement and part of the dynamic is the player interaction. To me, it's a game that's quite figuratively and literally the players more than the game itself. So kind of like, I mean, why is negotiation like a crucial part in the game? Like that's kind of a critical component to it. Like when people ask like what is the whole strategy aspect of Catan and what makes you enjoy it, I'm not just talking about negotiation and trading. I'm just talking negotiation in general, right? Like it's kind of such a unique dynamic. Like you can make or break your game just based on how you interact with another player, whether that can be a positive or negative experience. So that's something that we're going to be talking briefly about, is not only the negotiation part, but kind of balancing that aspect of cooperation and competition. And of course, I'm going to name drop Mr. Drew here, but Dandy always loves talking about, how can we make it a more collaborative environment, collaborative experience versus one that's strictly competitive, and how like having that overly competitive mindset actually can hurt you in the long run as you're playing more and more of these Catan games. And lastly, one of the important things I want to go over is what can Catan really teach you, in terms of interpersonal dynamic with players, with yourself, with, it's such a diverse game in that regard. So I guess like if we were to go to negotiation, obviously the first thing that people think about is trading. So trading is a core mechanism of the game. And it creates such an interesting balancing point, right? So at any point in a game, somebody could throw up their hands and say, hey, I want this guy to win, or I don't want you to win. They can throw all their cards across the table and king make somebody. Or quite the opposite, they could reserve all their cards, putting you in a position where if I can't get this guy to talk, if I can't get this guy to budge, I'm going to have quite a difficult time, advancing my own game, advancing my own position. And I can kind of like share this on like a more personal level, because I'm one of those people, right? when I look at the game, I hate having a lack of control. And I find that in an instance where you have a dead player or you have a player that's struggling, whether that may be their own fault or a fault of another player, you really need to put that person in a favorable position, whether that's you advancing or you making sacrifices to advance them, or, making what you would call quote unquote suboptimal moves, possibly to hinder someone else to get that person a little bit back up. And I can tell you truthfully that that works in a lot of scenarios. I've only played in 4 official Catan regionals. I've won 2 of them, but in the 2 that or in all of them that I've played, players will take note of the fact that if they're in a really bad spot and you're crushing it, but you're still helping them compared to the other 2 players, you're going to get more favors than you realize. And I'm not just necessarily talking about trading. I'm talking about things like plowing somebody or playing the win condition that you're not playing into the way that you want them to, or even just blocking or robbing another person, right? And I think that's just such an effective thing that you can do. One clear example that I can show, that I can like kind of briefly talk about, in the New York qualifier that I won to participate in 2024 Nationals, in my round 2 game, I believe I was playing on a pretty decent table, and I was just in such a strong position in the early game. But because I was just kind of like trading points away very loosely with the other players, whereas some players might be more reserved or might call out like a mistake or kind of just hold to themselves. Like if you're in a leading position, you don't mind giving out generous trades. Like you might not win as quickly, but if you can build yourself an ally, you can very quickly overwhelm a table. The worst case scenario in a Catan game generally is when you have someone 2v1ing you or 3v1ing you. And that kind of most of the time comes down to pacing, but sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, so let's kind of talk about like a little bit of I guess you could call it, you could call it the art of persuasion. The big thing that I really have to stress when you're playing a game is you have to make it seem like, and even if it's true or if it's not, you have to make your trades come across as mutually beneficial. And in voice chat games or over the board games, this is a lot easier to do than in like an online or like a ranked kind of environment. But the whole concept with a trade is that if you're the active player, 9 times out of 10, the trade is going to help you more than the other person. And really, because you're the one benefiting using the cards immediately that turn, how you portray the trade is so important, whether that's just in the value of the cards that you're presenting or knowing what cards the other person has and what they're going to be doing with it. But the point is, you want to try to make your trade come across to the other player as something that they not only want themselves, they don't really care what they're giving you in return. So you can kind of, it really comes down to the way that you frame that trade. And something that a lot of people don't know is you can explore different avenues, whether that's bluffing, leveraging specific card value, and even just promises. And I use the word promises kind of loosely, but words, right? And I'm not just talking about lying, non-binding, breaking, whatever. I tend to be overly honest in a lot of my games. And when we look back at my national performance, I think my biggest flaw in that game, and I'm not going to lie, was that I did not put up as much of a fight as I did in my preliminary games. And when you look at that as a U.S. not national Catan table, literally the hardest tournament probably in the Catan scene ever, I feel like I gave up that game, not in the game, but kind of mentally. Like I felt I was too passive, too honest, too cooperative. And I was not like that, I feel like, in my prelims. So to give you kind of more examples on that, like bluffing and making word promises, whether you honor them or not, I'm not going to hold anything against you because at the end of the day, there's no rule against that. But that can offer you a lot of opportunities. Now, granted, if you're a player that enjoys the chaos, enjoys that aspect of I'm going to lie to this person to get a temporary advantage, you do need to recognize that there's going to be risk involved in that. one player could just throw their hands up and say, F this, F you, you lied to me, I'm ending your game right now. Now, granted, that doesn't happen as often in organized community play or over the board play, but in ranked and online where it's anonymous, shoot, I'll be honest, I've done that before. I consider myself, I wouldn't say, no, I would say I'm composed majority of the time, but I've definitely thrown a couple of fits. People that know me know that for a fact. I'm not gonna lie and say that I have complete composure, because I don't, right? But let's break this down a little bit more. So the negotiation skills that you learn, to be quite blunt with you, you can apply that kind of broader than just Catan in general. I find that if you have aspects of your life, like for example, I work in a retail space, and that's kind of part of my job is selling things. And then kind of like when you look at a Catan game, it's not just, I want this card, you need this card. You have to present the value as, you need this card to do this, right? You're offering a second incentive. It's all important too that when you're offering trades or when you're offering these types of promises, that you're not only looking at it from the perspective again of like what the person's doing with the card, but you also have to read the room. Is I guess the term that you would use. Like, am I upsetting this person by asking for 2 cards, 3 cards? Can I make this person slightly more happy with me by just giving them a 1-to-1, even though I know I could squeeze them for a little bit more? And it's kind of that compromise between, do I squeeze this player for more cards? Or do I realize that by attempting to do that, I could offset them and kind of have them throw the book in my face? Yeah, so I find that to be a really strong suit, like a really strong point of the game. And future promises, right? You could tell somebody, I'll give you this card next turn or next time it rolls, and some people don't even try that. And to be honest with you, again, you could lie, you could not lie. Most of the time, people will honor that, but you could be like, I make a ton of wheat with my setup. I don't have any wheat right now, but if you're willing to take XYZ card for this card, I'll hook you up with my next one. So the person's like, great, I might not need this now, but I have a promise that I'll get it. Where that helps you as the active player is you're now performing a immediate action with a hand that you might otherwise have to pass on. And the other player's perception is, not only do I have a card that I want pretty much guaranteed by this person's word, but I don't, I'm building a good relationship with this player, with this person. So it's kind of a double win in that sense, because you're not even giving them that card that you kind of said you would, at least not on that turn. Yeah, so another thing, right? If we're talking about player interaction, the way that players place roads and settlements can also be kind of a deal breaking point. Like, even when you're placing your initial settlements, a lot of people will place directly on a port. Now, I'm not going to talk settlement strategy in this podcast episode, but some players will freak out if you just place on a spot that they expected to be open, whether that's one of their ports, whether they get greedy, point in, they point out. At the end of the day, you cannot control where a person places their settlement. You can only control what you place. Even if you try to convince them, hey, go here, go there, I can't have you take this spot's bad. It doesn't matter if it's a good move, bad move. At the end of the day, you can't control where that goes. The controlling factor that you have and the way that you can interact with the player is, where do I point my road and where am I building my settlement? And you need to be aware that in some cases, if you start with a road, if you start on a wood brick for your second spot, that person might just decide to cut you turn 1. Or if you opt to build a settlement on the desert with a couple of hexes or on a port because you think it's the best move for your game, you might piss someone off. And kind of figuring out how you're going to downplay not only that potential escalation, I find to be very crucial in a lot of cases. If you're able to communicate this beforehand, of course, this is always a good thing. But understanding and kind of, again, we want to go back to that point of reading the room. You need to understand that some players are going to be upset no matter what you do, regardless if it's the worst move or the best move. And that's another thing that I love about the game, is that every play you can argue good, bad, it's really interesting. But how do you kind of avoid that? I think at the end of the day, you need to play what you believe is your best spot to play, whether that's roads, whether that's settlements. You take what you decide is ultimately your best decision. And when somebody reacts to it, you either have to ignore those types of comments or just apologize and compromise and say, even if you're not sorry. I find that the worst thing you can do is if you place a settlement or a road and somebody's like, you just ruined my game, or I hate that you did that, or what WTF. You don't say, that was my best move, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't say, I'm playing my own game, or, whatever. You either ignore it or you say, I'm sorry, maybe I can XYZ. And again, even if you're not sorry, the intention is to make the other person de-escalate. A larger part, and it's not usually with settlements, but the larger part is going to come down to with the robber. So, the robber is a big topic in and of itself. The way you place this robber is so important. And even in instances where solo blocking someone, and for those that are unfamiliar, the term solo blocking is when you put the robber in a spot that is only on one person and does not mutually share anyone else. That can upset people in online and rank to the point where they just throw their hands up, even if it's just one rob. I just had that happen to me last night, where somebody king made another player based on a rob that I made that was optimal for my game. The impact of the robber is so critical. There's a few ways you can play it. You can play the robber to steal a specific card that you either know is guaranteed or you have the best chance of stealing. You can place the robber with the intent of blocking a resource that either favors you in the context of making the resource more rare, whether that's to essentially increase the overall value of your resource or decrease the value that you're blocking. Blocking the resource to prevent a specific action, such as a city, or just blocking to have a mutually shared block, or of course the more common block, which is blocking the person that's in the lead. So you need to also understand that reading the room there is so critical, because repeating a rob on someone when they're not definitively in first, or you don't have someone else agreeing with the way that you're doing your robs and blocks, it can throw the game to someone else effectively. And how I would kind of frame that is the term temporary alliances, right? Catan is a game where you play to 10. There's only one winner and 3 losers, so it doesn't matter how you spin it. If you're on 9 points on your let's say hypothetically, if you're on 9 points on your first turn and everyone else is on 2 points, it don't matter. It's the first person to 10. And the way I kind of want to address that is, unless you can get someone else to join you, whether that's another player or even both players to collude against first, a lot of the times it's not a good idea to rob someone continuously and block someone continuously, because they are going to get emotional and they are going to ask, why are you doing this? And even sometimes robbing someone in last for a card that you need. A lot of players nowadays, with the way that the competitive scene is moving, they frame this in the term that we call now today as extortion. And a lot of people don't like being extorted, right? And extortion is such a hard thing to play with, because it sucks being extorted, because overall the only reason the person has that power is they rolled the 7, which is completely random. So I prefer to play without extortion. Not that I think that it makes the game less competitive. I just think that it adds too much power to the person that rolls the 7. So just be aware that the robber tends to be probably the biggest form of player interaction, whether that's, it's always a negative interaction, generally speaking, but it's such a powerful balancing tool and powerful balancing dynamic. So I guess how can you kind of navigate through these types of games? Really, I think one thing that is so important, and I'm going to sound like such a hypocrite when I say this, because I don't do this a lot of the time, but this is the one thing that I want to work on, and one thing that I really want the community to work on as a whole, is you got to keep a positive mindset. In this game, it's very easy to complain, because one of the more common strategies is downplaying or framing someone else as leader. But 9 times out of 10, the way they do that is they just complain about how either bad their situation is, or how unlucky they are, or how lucky someone else is. And those are all negative things. I find that if you can keep the table dynamic positive, if you can keep it fun, a lot of the times that's going to play into your favor, into your strong suit a lot more than just constant negativity, because negativity kind of frames the table toward you and kind of points the direction, points the finger at you. And I find that being overly negative not only impacts your mindset and how you play, but it can also impact another player's mindset to the degree where they're just not going to enjoy playing with you, or they have that kind of in your mindset. If this is a person that, or a table that you're going to be playing with quite often, you don't want to be the person that's remembered as the person that ruins the experience overall, right? So moving on to that as well, another thing that I want to address is kind of like the social contract and trust of a board. Like, oh man. So you can build goodwill in a game, and you can also destroy it. Different actions like performing a dirty monopoly. A lot of players don't realize that, like, a verbal deal, yeah, it's non-binding, and there's nobody that's going to hold a gun to your head and be like, if you don't do this, you know, you're going to lose, you're going to die, like, it's breaking the, like, whatever, right? Point is, you got to understand that somebody will take that in such a hard way that you won't expect. So I find that if you're going to be breaking those kind of deals, you have to have a good reason to back it up. Whether that's you're going to win the game that turn, or you think that that player's not going to have enough of a leeway or leverage to either beat you or necessarily maybe help another player do that. But the way that you build trust with a player can be so critical. And again, we kind of reiterate, if you're in second, if you're in first, I find that it's so important just to throw out some one-to-ones with the person that's behind. If you find a person that's in last, if you find a person that's struggling, giving a generous trade, I think, honestly, a lot of the times just builds trust. It builds, it tells the person that you're not only flexible, but that you're not being too pushy and that you're not greedy. And if I had to kind of address one thing that a lot of people ask me, you know, what is the most common mistake that veteran players, I guess you could call myself a veteran given how long I've been in this frickin' scene. What is the most common mistake that veterans make? And I would have to say that it's just not being nice. And that's kind of like a broad thing to say. But the way that an experienced player interacts or even just proposes themselves, like to another player, is so important. Like if you sit on a board and you either say or you give off the vibe of, I've played a million games, you don't know what you're doing, I'm experienced, how is the other person going to react? The other person's going to react not only to the fact that, wow, I feel kind of uncomfortable playing with this person, but now that this person's given off that vibe of they're way better, they're experienced, they're going to hit you. They're going to, not only are they going to rob you, they're going to be overly hesitant to trade with you. And again, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You got to keep the table vibes light, man. You got to understand that everybody's here to have fun. Like, you're also here to play a competitive game, yes. But as an experienced player, even as a veteran player, you have to portray yourself just as an average Joe, just trying to play the game. And if you're taking a new player to the table, don't be like, you shouldn't have done that. That's a terrible move. Da, 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 da. Roll with it and just be like, oh, you know, it's all right. Or if you're going to try to fight it, be like, I kind of disagree because X, Y, Z. But the second that you lash, or the second that you call out a mistake, even if it is a mistake, a lot of the times it is, to be brutally honest with you. But the way that you react to another player is either going to encourage that behavior, or it's going to hurt the way that your future interactions play out. Let's talk now a little bit about empathy and communication. If you want to grow as a player, I ultimately find that you're over the board. Like, again, this is going to come out differently if you only play ranked, which is, it has a little bit less value, but I kind of want to present this because Catan is a real board game, man. I think ultimately that the skills that you present, whether that's card tracking, placements, you know, all the skills that you can build on as an individual, that can get you pretty high ranked. That can get you, you know, to be a very strong player. But what separates the players that are strong, that are good, from the best players are players that not only have those unique and individual skills, but they're players that can present active and strong communication, strategic or over-analytical thinking, empathy with other players. I find that these are skills that not a lot of people are talking about, that you really need to build upon if you want to improve your game. And it's simple things, just like downplaying, you know, tough tough moments, or presenting opportunities, like looking at a board, like analyzing a board and balancing it, or recognizing when somebody's a little down, a little frustrated, or somebody's a little hyped up, a little emotional, and kind of like either you can play off that in a positive way, or you can play that off in a negative way and be like, yo, dude, I think this ain't cool. You can kind of like manipulate the board in that sense, or you can kind of uplift the board. And both are viable options. I do both all the time when I play with a voice game, right? It's all about how you work with your table and not against your table. It's very hard to win the game in a 1v3 type of environment. So it's really, I think that's what it comes down to, man. It's reading the room and reading the table. And I find that if you're playing a voice chat game or you're playing an over the board game, if it's with people you don't know, get to know them. Like, ask some questions during the game, before the game. And I'm not strictly saying this just as a form of manipulation, but it really does help to build interpersonal relationships with the players on the board. Getting to know them better. Like, not only does that kind of help you maybe in the way that they think, but it might open up different avenues for you to possibly explore in the way that you negotiate and the way that you trade. So, yeah, if we go back to table conflict, which happens so often, you'll have a player get frustrated. You'll have a player say something, scream, whatever the case may be, throw a random block out or trade into a player that they shouldn't. How are you supposed to handle that in terms of conflict? And it's so easy to just say ignore it, or it's so easy to just say move through it. But a lot of the times you're going to get heated, and I will say that that is natural. I do that all of the time. And it's something you got to learn to control. Ultimately, I find that the players that can compose themselves, can keep a positive light, can kind of take the heat without dishing too much back, but not being passive. I don't want to say take it all and don't give anything back, but maybe what you give back, give it a little bit lighter. You know what I mean? Frame it in that positive light. To give you an example, right? If you block somebody and they say, F you, that's a bad block, you can kind of be like, I'm sorry, I was looking for this XYZ, or I kind of feel like you're in the lead right now. I understand. You're just not kind of offsetting that same emotional tension or even rising it to you. What I'm trying to say is don't match the energy they're giving and don't offer no energy at all. You're kind of somewhere in the middle where you're kind of not downplaying. You recognize what they're saying, what they're doing, but you're creating a more positive atmosphere behind it. And really, like I said, again, just keep the positive mindset going. Crack a joke, like take it. It's cool. It's all right if you got hit one time. And I think it's okay to make your point across that, I don't agree with that because XYZ. I think that block is poor because they're going to build a city with a 6 or something to this degree. You're offering an incentive or logic behind your reasoning other than, this Rob was on me, I don't like it, F you, right? That's such an easy way or an easy out. And that tends to be kind of what most players lean into when they see a bad block, a bad move, a bad Rob, whatever the case may be. But yeah, so it's really difficult, I would say, but that's really what it's going to come down to, guys, is how you compose yourself and how you present yourself. And I find that, at the end of the day, we got to ride it through. We got to enjoy ourselves. We got to loosen up a little bit, man. It's not only about this cutthroat BS. Like, come on, we can have some friendly competitive games. I think at the end of the day, that's just where I want to be and kind of where I think the scene should be. But to kind of like close a little bit, I don't want to go too long here for this first episode, but I would love if you guys could provide me some of your own insight and stories, or even if you have any questions for Catan in general, something you want to see talked about. I do want to try to keep these between, I would say, maybe 20 minutes to an hour. I know most podcasts tend to be a lot longer. Maybe we'll keep it closer to half an hour average. But if you guys want me to go over a specific topic, a specific thing, I would absolutely love to. And I find that we can definitely do that together. If you guys have something you want to ask me. But I do want to ask you one question before we close up here. And the question I want to ask you is, what is the most memorable negotiation or betrayal that you've had in Catan? whether that's somebody, flipping the board, getting crazy on you, or a negotiation or trade or moment that you felt was so crazy that you were able to push across, or something that you saw happen that you couldn't believe. I'd love to hear your unique experiences with that one. Uh, it's such an interesting dynamic because everybody has different experiences and different stories that they can share. Uh, Ultimately, I think that's actually, I'll share you one of mine. And I think this Twitch or this clip is still on my Twitch. Good old ABH, who now goes by or Joshua Wright, Catan, Australia's national champion now, wasn't at the time. I remember spectating a game that he played in Division One in Catan Championship with a brand new player, and it was a voice chat game, and I was just chilling there on mute recording the game. And I remember very clearly he was looking to do a trade with this guy, and the guy asks ABH, "Hey, are you using this brick to cut off my port? Because if you're not, I'll do the trade." And ABH is like, "Yeah, dude, I'm not doing that." He does the trade. ABH immediately cuts him off with the with the brick that he was just given, and the other guy not only leaves the voice chat, he leaves the game and the server. And everybody's cracking up in the voice chat because that trade that ABH did, it not only gave him the port, it gave him a really good expansion spot that he didn't have, which ultimately I believe let him win the game. But the fact that the trade was done with a verbal agreement that you wouldn't use the brick to cut the player that gave him the brick, everybody was just laughing because that happens. Of course, and ultimately the experience of that new player was not pleasant. But that's kind of a betrayal story that I wanted to share with you guys. And yeah, if you would like me also to invite like a guest commentator or someone on here, I would love to do that as well. But I think that's ultimately going to be it. Definitely share me. Like I said, that's going to be our that's going to be our question. Give me something regarding negotiation and betrayal. A little quick story. If I like it, maybe I'll feature it in the next episode here. But hey, like I said, hope you guys enjoyed. This is Shades on Broadway signing out of the Shades on Voice podcast episode. Take care, guys.